All right, so we are officially starting, and a warm welcome to everyone who has joined this evening. This course is how to squat for your pelvic floor, or I should say class. So we'll be meeting for an hour, and we will be exploring movement focused on how to improve your squat, how to get more pelvic floor benefit out of your squat. And before we get started, I want to state the obvious, and if you're watching the recording as well, this is important. I do not know you. I do not know your personal medical history background. So the information that I am providing and the exercises that we are doing this evening may or may not be appropriate for you. So what I am going to trust is that you are, number one, listening to your body, that number two, you are able to remember what works for your body and what doesn't work for your body and abide by that. And then I also want you to keep in mind if there are certain restrictions. So if you have a knee replacement, a knee injury, a hip replacement, and you have been told by your physician or physical therapist or physiotherapist that there are certain movements that you need to be mindful not to do, then that's something for you to abide by. There are all kinds of different hardware that can go in different types of hip replacements that carry their own unique restrictions to them. So I am unable to tell you what you absolutely should or should not do in your particular situation. So that is the caveat for this course. Pay attention to your body, listen to what feedback you're getting from your body, and be mindful to not force things. So if something that I show you is really challenging for you or uncomfortable for you, then I want you to back off or not do it, okay? So those are the rules that we're playing by this evening so that everyone can stay safe. And I've got somebody who came on who's not muted, so if everybody could mute themselves.
6 o'clock.
There we go. All right. And then there was a specific question regarding hip replacement. And so there is, I don't know what the restrictions are on your particular hip replacement regarding the amount of hip flexion that you've been okayed to do. So that would be something to keep in mind. How much hip flexion is okay for you and your situation and your knee or hip replacement? And or this would also apply to knee replacements. How much knee flexion have you been okayed to do? So you may need to modify. And I will do my best to be mindful of modifications as we go along. And I'm just checking here in the chat. Okay, and the other thing I want you to keep in mind, if you have pelvic organ prolapse and you have not been doing a lot of prep work and have not been doing a lot of practice squatting and have to and are lacking some strength, then doing a full squat may not be appropriate for you. So again, this is something that for you to be mindful of with your own body as to what works for you. And Alicia in particular asked, if you have pelvic floor weakness, should you not do a full resting squat until you can do it properly? Feet forward, weight in heels, etc. And no, I would not say that that is the criteria by which I would determine whether or not someone should do a full squat. Things that I would look at are how much strength do they have? How much do they have to heave ho and increase intra-abdominal pressure to make up for lack of strength in their legs? So leg strength can come into factor a lot, as well as glute strength And if you notice that your symptoms have increased, then I would say that is probably a sign to back off and start doing more preparatory work and some modifications until you are able to develop the strength needed to be able to do a full squat. And strength is just one part of a full squat, as we'll see this evening. All right. So I also close this window here. All right, bear with me 1 second here. All right. Okay, so one thing I want to keep in mind, sometimes we think of squat as a specific position and that there is a right way to squat and a wrong way to squat. And I want to kind of bust that myth this evening. And I love this quote from Katie Bowman, who wrote the book Move Your DNA, which I highly recommend. A squat is much more than a position. A squat is an experience. And how we do the squat, how we move into the squat and out of the squat is going to give us different results. And so that's what we're here to explore tonight is what are your personal restrictions and ranges of motion and mobility gaps and strength gaps that you take into your squat, and what is the best way for you to work with those and improve upon those so that you can continue to reap the benefits of a squat. There is no one right way to do a squat, and there is really no wrong way to do a squat. I would say the things to be mindful of when you squat are whether or not you are bearing down and holding your breath when you squat. So if that is an issue for you, then a modification needs to be made, especially if you are having issues with pelvic floor, whether it's prolapse, incontinence, any of the factors that go along with pelvic floor issues. I also want you to keep in mind that a squat is just one piece, one part of the pelvic floor picture, one part of our whole body function. It is, if we think about movement as nutrition and needing to get a variety of nutrients from our movement, which means we have to move in a variety of ways, then a squat is just one part of the whole foods picture, the whole meal that we should be eating and consuming of movement on a daily basis. If we were still in a hunter-gatherer situation, we would be squatting to bathroom. We would be squatting to get down on the floor to go to bed. We would be squatting to cook. We would be squatting to garden or to gather what it is that we're gathering. So we would be incorporating squatting throughout our day on a regular basis, which is often quite different than what we think of with squatting, where we may squat when we go to the gym and do sets of 3 and 10 reps per set. So just think about squatting in the context of the whole big picture of movement that we need in order for our body to function well, including our pelvic floor. And I'm going to be giving you different parameters to pay attention to this evening, not because there is one way to squat that is the right way to squat, but because we often squat in such a way as to bypass our particular tension patterns and our particular lack of mobility in certain areas and lack of strength in certain areas. And if we continue to squat in those same ways that reinforce our tension patterns and our own limitations that we all have, then we're not going to get different results. So The squat we're after, as it says in this quote, is one that slowly coaxes out a version of yourself not tainted by modern living, which is a really tall order and which is something that takes time. Takes time, takes practice, takes attention. So we're going to start off in an unweighted squat. And so we're going to start on the floor, and you're going to be on all fours. If being on all fours is uncomfortable for you in terms of hand and wrist tension, which would be pretty common, you can come down to your elbows. And what I want you to first start off with is that the knees are stacked underneath your pelvis. And I want you to check in that your pelvis is relaxed down towards the floor. So see if your low back is rounded or if the pelvis is untucked and relaxed down towards the floor. And then in this position, I want you to go ahead and bring your pelvis back towards your heels. So you're moving back towards your heels. And I want you to pay attention to what's happening with your hips, what's happening with your knees. Specifically, is it comfortable? Is it uncomfortable? Check and notice, is your pelvis tucking under, which it will do the further down you go. And you're just noticing and getting a sense of what is this movement like for your body? Where are you feeling tension? Where does it feel like you've got ease? And then we'll go ahead and come back up. And we're going to start again. And this time I'm also going to have you widen your knees a little bit wider than pelvis width. So your knees are underneath the hips, but wider than your pelvis. And we'll go ahead and sit back again. This time I want you to track the point at which your pelvis starts to tuck under, and I want you to stop when you notice that start to happen. So you're just going to get a sense of what's the range of motion of your hips without tucking your pelvis under. And we'll go ahead and come back up. And now this time, I want you to tuck your toes under so that the ball of your foot is possibly in contact with the floor. May not be, depending on how much tension you have through your toes. So that's number one. Just notice, what's that like for you? I definitely have more ease with my left foot, excuse me, compared to my right. My right big toe is not as mobile as my left. So you're going to pay attention to that. In this toes tucked under position, I want you to also check back in with your pelvis. Make sure that the pelvis is untucked and relaxed down towards the floor. And then now we're going to go move the pelvis back towards the heels again. And I want you to notice what's different now that your toes are tucked under. And notice, do your heels want to rock out? Do they want to rock in? What's happening with your lower leg as you lower your pelvis down towards your heels? And at the bottom, check in with the crease of your hips. So I'm noticing I've got more ease through the right crease of my hip compared to my left side. I feel like I could go further back on my right, but not with my left. And then we'll come back up again. And this time, for those of you who are ribcage alignment savvy, and for those of you who are still working on that, which we're all still working on that, I promise you, I want you to think about keeping your pelvis untucked, so tilted down towards the floor, and then I want you to think about lifting the back of your ribcage up towards the ceiling so that you're not allowing your ribs to drop down towards the floor, but instead, you're stacking them in the same horizontal line as your pelvis. And then from here, without changing your pelvis or your ribs, go ahead and move back towards your heels. And notice how your abs are working to help maintain the position of your ribs. Notice how much more difficult it is to go back without popping your ribs down towards the floor. And keep that rib cage up towards the ceiling. Don't let it drop down. And keep the pelvis untucked. Because the tendency is going to be to round the pelvis to help keep the ribs in position. And then go ahead and come out of that. So I threw on an extra layer there with the ribs. And if you're struggling to keep your pelvis untucked, just forget about the ribs. Just work with the pelvis and keeping the pelvis untucked. If you want more of a challenge, then we can add in the rib cage piece of things. But you get to decide what you're ready for and what is too much to manage, okay? All right, let's come off of all fours. And I'm just gonna check in. We got some questions or things going on in the chat. Oh. Good. Thanks for helping out, Jessica. All right, where did I go? There we go. All right, so now, if you feel comfortable squatting all the way down, I'm gonna invite you to do that. If you don't, such as you have a knee injury or you have a hip replacement and you don't want to squat all the way down, you can do a few things. You can squat down to a chair, okay? Would be one option. If you don't want to go all the way down to the floor, you can take your couch cushion or bolster and raise the floor up so that you're modifying it in that way. Respect your body. All right, so whatever you're using, go ahead and squat down to as deep as you comfortably can go. And I just want you to notice how this is different now that you are fully weight bearing compared to being on all fours. And notice what it's like for your hips and your knee joints. Notice, can you get your heels on the floor? Notice if your feet are turned out or you have to work really hard to keep them from turning out. Notice where, and I'm going to turn sideways for this. Notice where your knees are in relation to your ankles. So are they in front to greater or lesser extent? Are they further back to a more vertical chin, and just notice what that's like for you. Also, check in with your low back. Are you really, really rounded and curved under with your pelvis to accommodate this position? And then go ahead and come up, but as you come up, I want you to be sure that you're exhaling, you're not holding your breath, and I want you to notice, do you have to use a lot of momentum to get yourself up? Can you push through your legs? Are your legs strong enough to do that? Do you need to hold your breath to get you up? Try not to do that, and then go ahead and come up. So all of those are going to let us know what are your areas of weakness, or what are some of your gaps in your strength or your mobility that need to be built up in order to squat comfortably. So for most of us, lower leg tension plays a role in what's going on with our squat. Go ahead and get your half dome and either your rolled up towel, rolled up yoga mat if you don't have a half dome. And we're going to start off with a calf stretch. So you're going to put the ball of your foot up on your half dome. Heel is going to be in contact with the floor. Both knees are straight. And then you'll step forward with your opposite foot. And I want you to notice as you do this, as you step forward, you'll probably notice the stretch in your calf area. So just check in with that. And then as you get comfortable here, I want you to notice, did you shove your pelvis way forward to feel like you're getting more of a stretch? And if so, can you back your pelvis up and bring your torso so that it's stacked over your pelvis? So we don't want the forward lean ski slope version of the calf stretch. I want you to back it up so that your pelvis is stacked over your ankles and your torso is stacked over your pelvis. And you may feel like, wow, I'm not getting a lot of calf stretch compared to this. This felt like I was doing a lot more. That would be very common. But I just want you to play with it. I want you to notice when you back it up, are you really wobbly? Are you losing your balance? Are you clenching your toes and clenching your quads and your butt to keep yourself upright? Or are you pretty comfortable here? And we'll go ahead and switch sides. And again, ball of the foot on the half dome, heel down, step forward with the opposite foot, and just check in as you get situated. Where is your pelvis? Has it drifted forward to increase your stretch or increase your stretch sensation? And if so, go ahead and back it up. And check in. As you back it up, do you feel like you're going to fall backwards? Do you have to clench with your quads or your toes to keep yourself upright? And if that's the case, I want you to back your standing foot up even more, which can be a real blow to the ego, number one. And number two, it can be confusing because you feel like, wait a minute, I'm feeling a lot less stretch than I was when I was doing this. And what I want you to keep in mind is the amount of stretch sensation that you feel is not an accurate indication of whether or not what you're doing is effective. So we're used to calibrating our brain to a certain amount of sensation equals a good stretch. And I want you to rethink that being able to keep certain parameters in mind helps you know that you're stretching what you think you're stretching, which makes the stretch more effective. If you can't keep the parameters, then you're using other things to bypass your boundaries. And we'll come back to the first side. So calf stretch during a squat isn't really needed because our knees are bent. And what I was doing was stretching your gastrocnemius muscle, which runs from the Achilles tendon and crosses the knee. So what's most often the limiting factor when we are having difficulty flexing the ankle the appropriate amount that we need to be able to squat well is the soleus muscle, which is one of our calf muscles. And I'm going to have you come back to the calf stretch, follow the foot on the half dome, heel on the floor. And this time, I'm going to have you bend both knees. This stretch gives us access to the soleus muscle. And you may notice that you can't bend your knees very far. And you may feel like your ankle doesn't bend well, that there's a limitation in the crease of your ankle. I want you to think about allowing that front of your ankle to soften as it bends. Sometimes we'll try to pull the foot up to increase the stretch. So just see, can you allow the foot to be nice and relaxed? And the only thing that's changing from the calf stretch is we're bending the knees. And we'll come to the second side. So follow the foot is on the half dome. Settle into our calf stretch. And the only thing that's changing here is you're bending both knees. Now the tendency often is to again let the pelvis drift forward. So check in that your weight is still back over your heel. And again, think about letting that front crease of the ankle soften to allow the ankle to bend, keeping that foot nice and relaxed. And you'll notice it's different side to side. And we'll come back to the first side. I'm going to face you this time because I'm going to have you pay attention to another piece. So we'll go ahead and back to that first side, follow the foot up, and then we will bend the knees for the soleus stretch. Now I want you to check, look down, and notice, are your knees in line with your ankles, or have they collapsed in, one or both? And it would be most likely to be the one that's on the half dome. And if that's the case, I want you to line the knee back up with your ankle, which will probably mean you have to straighten your knees a little bit to accommodate that. So one of the ways we blow past our boundary is by letting that ankle roll in and the knee roll in. So we're no longer really honing in on that soleus muscle, and lining the knee in line with the ankle, maintaining the arch of the foot helps us to really hone in on that soleus muscle. And so if you notice when you were squatting that your ankles rolled in and you kind of collapsed or pronated, that was one way your body had of bypassing tension in the ankle joint and in the lower leg, so the soleus muscle. And we'll switch sides. And notice too, the width of your feet ideally matches the width of your pelvis. We'll go ahead and bend both knees. And just notice, what's it like side to side? How does the story of each side vary? So for me, my left ankle feels like it's got less mobility compared to my right. Check that your pelvis hasn't drifted forward, and check that your knee is in line with your ankle. And are you breathing? All right. So now I want want you to go ahead and recheck your squat. So whether you were using a chair or whether you were using a bolster, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if you're squatting with a bolster, that will allow you to come down without, that will decrease the range of motion that you have or that you need. So it's a way of giving you a little bit more than a chair, but less than if you're going all the way to the floor. And just notice, what's it like in your lower leg now that we've done some calf and soleus stretching? Is it more comfortable through your ankle? Are you able to maintain your feet on the floor versus collapsing inward or outward? And what do you notice with your knees as well? Are they dropping in or out, or are you able to keep them a little more easily in line with your ankles? And we'll go ahead and come out of that. So we're just working apart and then checking in and seeing what we're noticing as a result. And keep in mind, that was a really quick, we spent 5-7 minutes addressing the calf muscles and the soleus muscles. So now I want you to take either a roll-up yoga mat is a great tool for this, or if you have a half dome, or ideally 2 half domes so that you have a longer one, that would be really perfect. And now I'm going to have you place that underneath your heels, even if you were able to keep your heels down on the ground. I want you to place something underneath your heels to elevate it a little bit. And then I want you to go ahead and grab your chair so that we're not going all the way down. So you got to position yourself a little bit here with your chair. And I want you to, with the half dome under your heels, notice what is it like to go down and how much easier is it for you to back your pelvis up and keep your shins vertical with something underneath you compared to without something. So we're doing it with, okay? And what we're working on here is the vertical shin, which means, and the more vertical you keep your shin, the more backed up your pelvis has to be, which means the more you're accessing your glutes, you're asking your glutes to really help out, and you can use your upper body to help counterbalance, and then coming up and out, you're continuing to maintain that vertical shin as best as you can. And then compare it to doing it without the half dome, without anything under your heels. And I am wider than pelvis width apart. So we're going to come down again, and again the focus is going to be on keeping the shins as vertical as possible, which means you're really reaching back. And so here you can see my knees came forward a little bit because I don't have the glute strength and the glute mass yet to maintain my vertical shin exactly where it should ideally be. And then we'll come out, and you're driving through the heels. And the point that you're working towards is how quickly Can you back your pelvis up and get your shins vertical? So go ahead and do it without worrying about keeping your shins vertical. And before we go on, if you're finding that even getting in and out of the chair is really challenging for you, just totally okay and understandable. Bolster yourself up so that you've got less lowering to go, or less distance to go down to your chair, which is going to meet yourself a little bit more where you are, okay? So instead of going all the way down to the seat, you're a little bit higher and you're reaching forward from here, okay? So you have options. And I lost my train of thought that I was having. Oh, yeah. I wanted you to feel what it's like. Go ahead and come down to the chair without worrying about keeping your shins vertical. So don't worry about where your knees are. Just let's see where they would naturally go if you weren't working to keep them stacked over your ankle. And then go ahead and come up and just see what you naturally do to come up from a squat. And play with that just a little bit, the going down and the coming up. And notice how you most likely drive the movement with your knees coming forward and even a little bit of heave-ho momentum to come up and out of your chair, okay? And feel how this is asking a lot of your quads. So I'm feeling a lot right here. It's not like my glutes are not doing anything. They are doing something. But it definitely changes the workload from glutes being the primary workhorse when I keep my shins vertical to my quads being the primary workhorse. And if you come out of it with a tucked pelvis, so you might even drive with the pelvis a little bit, you're doubly losing access to your glutes when you come up and down from a chair. So take a break. Let's come back to a soleus stretch and give your legs a little rest. So follow the foot up, and we're going to bend the knees again. Also check, as you do your soleus stretch, sometimes there can be a tendency to twist the pelvis one way or the other. And that's another way that we bypass tension. And we'll switch sides. And check that the knee is staying in line with the ankle. So the thing with alignment is not that there is only one way to move and that we have to move in these very fixed, rigid ways. It's not that at all. It's that, when we pay attention to certain parameters, we're better able to evaluate are we doing what we think we're doing, number one, and number two, what strength and mobility gaps do we have that we are perhaps ideally wanting to address if we're wanting to change the results that we are currently getting. And we'll come back to the first side. And we'll go ahead and bend the knees. So when it comes to squatting, today we've been paying a lot of attention to what's going on with the lower leg and addressing the soleus tension piece of the equation through the soleus stretch and by bolstering underneath the heels. However, there's also quad tension that will limit the mobility of the knees. There's also hip flexor tension that will limit the mobility of the hips and the ability of the hips to flex to the degree that's needed to get into a deep squat. And then we also have the strength piece of the picture. And we'll switch sides here. So we need a certain amount of quad strength, and we need a certain amount of glute strength and hamstring strength and core strength to be able to squat well without using a lot of momentum, without increasing our intra-abdominal pressure to a point where it is not non-productive, that's not the word I want, but to the point where it's detrimental. And we'll come out of that. All right, so now I'm going to show you one of my favorite ways of working with a squat when you still have your current limitations, because we're not magically going to boost our glute strength in 2 quick steps, and we're not magically going to get the glute mass that is needed to help us maintain this position without losing our balance. But we can use kind of a training wheels approach to this. And so what I like to do is take a yoga strap and wrap it around a door handle. And from this position, hang off of the strap so that it's helping me make up for my lack of strength. And it's allowing me to explore some of those ranges of motion a little bit differently since I have this training wheel. So go ahead and get yourself situated with a strap. And I find the door handle is the easiest workaround with this. And then as you squat down, keep the arms outstretched. As you squat down, you're using the strap to hang off of, which allows you to keep your pelvis back and keep your shins vertical without falling on your butt. And so you're going down, keeping everything backed up. And I hope this doesn't collapse on me. Keeping the torso forward too, because the torso is still going to counterbalance. Coming down as far as you're comfortable with, so don't force it. And then as you come up, I want you to think about reaching back with your pelvis. So backing up your pelvis to keep the shins vertical as you drive through the heels to come up, okay? So we'll go down again. Coming down, keeping the shins vertical as possible, and really use the strap to hang off of. And you're coming down. And then as you come up, think about backing yourself up, pushing through the heels to bring yourself upright. All right, so as you do that, you're thinking about backing this up to keep the shins upright instead of driving it forward to come up, which is what we habitually do, most of us. So it's a different movement pattern, this backing it up versus this driving it forward, okay? Now the other piece you can add on, and it's optional. So if your brain is full and you have plenty to think about, then let this go. If you want another challenge, then you can also think about what's happening with your ribs as you're doing this. So are you driving the movement with your rib cage thrusting, which means you don't have as much core support as a result to use during your squat? Or can you allow the rib cage to be relaxed down and you can feel the abs begin to engage in that position? And then go ahead and lower yourself down, keeping the ribs in alignment, keeping yourself backed up. Now watch what happens as you come up, keeping the ribs relaxed down and backing it up through the pelvis to come up. Don't let the ribs pop and come to standing. That will most likely be a very different experience because the tendency is to come down and then thrust forward, which feels like you're backing it up, and you are to some extent, but you're also popping the ribs forward. So what's it like to reach back without popping the ribs forward? And that's a very, very different experience for your core and for your back as well. If you do a lot of squats, popping your ribs out, you're most likely gonna feel it in your low back at some point, versus if you're keeping the ribs relaxed down. So this is another thing to pay attention to. Do you have to pop your ribs in order to come out of a squat? And if so, don't go as deep, because that's one way we're getting momentum to come up versus using our strength. So it's really about noticing, what is your body doing? How is it doing what it's doing? And is it reinforcing habits that are creating the problems that you're trying to correct by squatting? Or is it helping to correct the habits, that have led you to, at least in part, to what you're experiencing with your body? So we're working to meet your body where it is with this set of parameters, not because it is the right way to squat, but because we're working to correct some of these strength limitations and mobility limitations that, again, have set you up for different issues that you are currently experiencing. All right, so you have my favorite training wheels squat. You have the bolster under your heels option, and that is helpful for those of you who can't get your heels down, as well as for those of us who can, because even for those of us who can get our heels down, we're still working, I can almost guarantee, still working to keep the shins vertical. And that tension in the lower leg is a big piece of that equation, along with the glute strength and the glute mass. So elevating the heels is one way to start working that vertical shin and practicing your squat. And then we also did the floor version with the toes under and the toes tucked, and you can see how both of those compare. So all of these pieces are things that you can continue to work with, and including the squat that we did in and out of the chair, because we're certainly having regular experience with a chair and sitting and getting out of a seated position. If nothing else, even if you have gotten rid of your chairs, if nothing else, you still have a toilet. So getting on and off the toilet several times a day is a great opportunity to practice your squat. So you got a lot of pieces to work with, and I am hoping that this sheds some light on your particular gaps and it gives you a clearer sense of what is going to be of most benefit to you and what to best focus on. All right, so with that, I'm going to take questions, and I know there are a couple knee questions that came in earlier, so I'm going to address those. So modifications that can be done while squatting for those who have knee issues, i.e. torn cartilage. So I wouldn't say that there's any one thing that applies to everyone with knee issues, but one modification you can play with is to place something behind the knees so that when you squat, really to help the hand stay put, when you squat down, you're able to rest a little bit more without putting so much force on your knees. And you can do that in that position, and then you can also do it when you're doing a floor squat. So that's another way to modify the squat so that you are taking some of the load off the knees by not having so much knee flexion and still being able to relax a little bit and explore some of the hip flexion without increasing the amount of knee flexion. So that would be one thing that I would suggest playing with. Now, if somebody's got torn cartilage, doing a deep squat may not be what is best for them. We got to realize that the end goal is not the squat, because doing a squat and compromising your body in the process isn't gonna reap the benefits. So another question was, how can knees recovering from an injury be made stronger so the squat can be deeper? Gosh, there's so much to that. Number one, I would just say, let the knees recover, and I wouldn't make the end goal to go deeper in a squat. I would do a lot of the squat prep that we did on the floor. So unweighted is what I would work with a lot. And then looking at what's going on with the hips, what's going on with the lower leg and the feet, because both of those pieces of the equation, the knee is in the middle of that. And so they are very often contributing factors to what's going on with knee issues. So we got to look at what's creating the knee problem in the first place, which may or may not mean you want to be working towards deep squats. There may be a lot of things that need to be addressed prior to doing a deep squat. And it's most likely not just a strength issue is the other thing I wanted to address. Yeah, is it okay that my body shakes or tremors during the soleus stretch? Yeah, you know, shaking and tremoring can be a way that the nervous system is discharging extra energy and recalibrating itself. It can be just a nice shift. It can be a little disconcerting at times. It can sometimes be fatigue that's going on. So I wouldn't say there's anything inherently wrong with shaking or tremoring during any stretch. Back off if that feels uncomfortable or disconcerting for you. Couldn't feel a stretch in the soleus stretch. Yeah, so just oftentimes there's not a lot of stretch sensation when doing a soleus stretch. It may be more a lack of mobility that you're aware of, that the ankle doesn't feel like it can quite flex. So that would be another sign that there's still some work to be done with that particular stretch. And again, just a reminder, we're not really looking at how much sensation you're feeling when doing a stretch so much as we are looking at, can you maintain certain parameters, the knee in line with the ankle? Can you keep the pelvis stacked over the heel? And what happens when those parameters are kept in place? All right, very tight soleus, as well as old ankle sprain. Yes, hello. I can relate to that. Is it helpful to squat in the way that you can, with knees over ankles and heels up, to allow for a more aggressive soleus stretch? So, I don't know. I'm not big on aggressive stretching. I would explore doing the soleus stretch with the half dome or whatever equipment that you have available to you. I would also experiment with squatting with the modifications that we played with this evening. And, you know, if you do like to occasionally go into that soleus stretch, see how your body responds to it. If you've got an old injury, I would encourage you to probably not be aggressive with it, but look at maybe doing stretches a little more frequently throughout your day to change things up and to get more improvements. I don't think that harder is better necessarily. And I also, just to reiterate, there's nothing wrong with doing a squat where your knees are in front of your ankles. It's part of the process, and it's just knowing what you're working towards and what you want to build on to improve. All right, another question. Is it possible to keep the shins truly 100% vertical when going down into a squat, or is it normal to have your shins come slightly forward? So yes, it is possible. Can most of us do it? No. Most of us have lived lives of seated in chairs and shoes and all of the tension patterns and joint limitation ranges of motion that go along with it, as well as, and Katie talks about this in her Move Your DNA book, the squatting facets. So we have natural areas of our bone that are designed to help us, our hip joints, accommodate a squat. We're born with them, but if we don't squat regularly, then our bony model adapts to the activities and movements that we're doing. So is it possible for you now, given the life that you have led up to this point, to get your shins completely vertical? I don't know. And, you know, regardless, the process of working towards that is still going to be really, really valuable. If we come to a squat with a mentality that the only valuable squat is one that meets these criteria of a completely vertical shin and completely straight outside edges of the feet and keeping the pelvis untucked and keeping the rib cage aligned. If we have the mentality of it's all or nothing, then I think we're really, really missing the boat, because where we are is where we are, and there's not much we can do about what has happened prior to this point, but it doesn't negate the benefits that can be had by meeting ourselves where we are and just incrementally continuing to work and improve and shift things along the way. Again, does that mean you're going to eventually get to completely vertical shins? I don't know. What if you can't bend at the front of the hips? So if you've got so much hip flexor tension, then that would be the first thing to start addressing. And I would say, you know, look at what is your range of motion that's there. Like, if you can sit, then you've got some range of motion in the front of your hips, and I'm going to assume you've got some there. So the floor squat that we did on all fours or on your forearms and knees, and then gradually, incrementally backing it up and just hanging out there and breathing. And you may want something padding under your knees if your knees are uncomfortable with the floor, so just so you have a little bit of a softer surface. But work with what you've got and just incrementally baby step it. All right, does it matter when we breathe in and out in the squatting process? I don't know. I haven't done any research on that. I don't know that there is any on it, but what I was taught in my gym days was to inhale as going down and exhale as I'm coming up, and to exhale through the mouth. And I don't know that it would be necessarily, I'm just thinking through from a pelvic floor perspective. If you're exhaling as you're coming out, then the pelvic floor ideally will be recoiling and lifting up in response to the exhale. So based on that, I'd say probably exhaling as you come up is going to be an optimal situation. The main thing to be aware of is to avoid holding the breath and bearing down. Now, does that mean that there's never a situation where you would hold your breath and bear down? No. But if you're always doing that, and if you have a compromised pelvic floor, or if you have a compromised pelvic floor, then I would say you want to minimize bearing down, and you certainly don't want to do an exercise that requires you to consistently be bearing down. One of the ways that we make up for our strength gap to help stabilize our core and our trunk when we are lifting is through holding our breath. So you see the weightlifters, when they're doing their squats, they aren't breathing out all the way up. They are intentionally holding their breath to stabilize because of the really heavy weights that they are trying to work with. If you've got a pelvic floor issue, then that's probably not something that you want to be doing, or definitely not something you want to be doing without working with a physical therapist or a personal trainer who's really skilled in pelvic floor issues to help you to help you do that without blowing out your pelvic floor in the process. All right. So I think that's all the questions. Oh, I know Carrie asked one up here. So lesser ankle range of motion because of an ankle sprain, and finds that it affects his squat. So yeah, I have kind of the same situation going on with my left ankle, and I would just say doing the soleus stretch and checking with the frequency. So the stretch is one thing, but doing the frequency throughout the day can be really helpful in making changes. There's also, I'm pretty sure you've got the role model book, Carrie, if I remember correctly. Jill Miller's got a really nice ankle mobilization move in that book, and some work with the yoga tune-up balls as well for working around the ankle joint. And I think that can be helpful for injuries and tendon or ligament tears or strains, to help mobilize the joint a little bit better. So I would highly recommend that book to everyone. It's a really nice comprehensive piece. All right, question, somebody with a fused ankle. So with a fused ankle, you're gonna have limited range of motion, and there's just no amount of stretching that's going to change a fused ankle. So you're gonna have to be really mindful of not forcing past the fusion. And I would want to know, what does the doctor recommend in terms of ranges of motion that are safe to do with a fused ankle? And that's going to be something to be really mindful of with that. All right. Thank you everyone for being here and coming to play with me today. It was great to have you and great to see some of my familiar people. All right. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.